In the heart of rural America, surrounded by vast golden fields and the distant hum of tractors, lay the quiet farming town of Elmswood. Here, life moved at a steady pace, untouched by the chaos of the outside world. Everyone in Elmswood knew each other, and most days passed uneventfully. That was until the arrival of a shadowy group of strangers in battered leather jackets and loud motorcycles shattered the town's serenity. Among the peaceful farmers was John Carver, a former Navy SEAL who had traded his life of danger and missions for the simplicity of a farm. He lived with his daughter, Emma, a bright and spirited young woman who was as skilled in managing crops as she was in handling horses. The two had built a life of harmony on their land, a sprawling property bordered by a dense line of trees that whispered secrets with every breeze. John's past was a closely guarded mystery in Elmswood. Few knew of his decorated military career, marked by acts of valor and an unshakable resolve that had earned him respect in circles far beyond the town's boundaries. He preferred to leave that life behind, finding solace in the simplicity of farm chores and the companionship of his daughter. One humid summer evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and cast a golden glow over the fields, a menacing sound rolled into town. The roar of engines cut through the stillness, and the townsfolk peered out from their windows in curiosity and unease. The bandits had arrived. Their leader, a gruff man named Vince, had a reputation for causing trouble wherever he went. To the people of Elmswood, they were an unwelcome disruption, but Vince and his crew had other plans. After sizing up the quiet town, they set their sights on the Carver farm, drawn by rumors of a beautiful and independent young woman. What began as a quiet evening would soon spiral into an ordeal that would awaken a side of John Carver no one had ever seen, a man prepared to protect his family at all costs. The town of Elmswood was about to witness a story of courage, revenge, and the lengths one man would go to defend what he loved most. The bandits settled into an old, abandoned barn on the outskirts of Elmswood. The structure, weathered and leaning from years of neglect, was the perfect hideout. Vince, their leader, paced back and forth, his steel-toed boots kicking up dust with each step. His gang, a ragtag group of misfits with rough edges and even rougher attitudes, lounged on scattered hay bales, their laughter echoing through the decrepit walls. "Small town, easy pickings," Vince muttered, a twisted grin spreading across his scarred face. "Nobody here's gonna give us trouble." One of the younger members, a wiry man named Jake, leaned forward. "I heard there's a farmer's daughter who's a real looker. Folks in town won't stop talking about her." Vince's eyes glinted with interest. "Well, well, sounds like we've got ourselves some entertainment." Back at the Carver farm, Emma worked diligently, her hands stained with soil as she planted rows of tomatoes in the garden. The farm was her sanctuary, a place where she felt a deep connection to nature and her father. Despite the simplicity of her life, Emma was no stranger to hard work. She had grown up watching her father toil from dawn until dusk, and she shared his determination and resilience. John, meanwhile, stood on the porch, his eyes scanning the horizon. Years of military training had honed his instincts, and tonight something felt off. The distant rumble of motorcycles earlier that evening had unsettled him, and his gut told him trouble was brewing. "Emma," he called out, his voice calm but firm, "wrap up for the day. I want you inside before dark." Emma looked up, her brow furrowed. "Is everything okay, Dad?" "Just a feeling," he replied, his gaze still fixed on the distant tree line. "Better safe than sorry." As the sun dipped lower, the bandits made their way toward the farm. They approached under the cover of darkness, their footsteps muffled by the soft earth. Vince led the way, his eyes scanning the property for signs of activity. The sight of the well-kept farmhouse and the neatly tended garden only fueled his sense of superiority. To him, this was just another family too weak to resist his crew. Inside, John sat at the kitchen table, cleaning an old hunting rifle. Though he had left his military days behind, he had never entirely abandoned his skills. His weapons were well maintained, and his reflexes were sharp. Emma sat across from him, sipping tea and chatting about the day's work. The cozy warmth of the kitchen was a stark contrast to the danger creeping closer outside. The bandits circled the farm, their movements silent and deliberate. Jake peered through a window, catching a glimpse of Emma as she laughed at something her father said. "She's even prettier than they said," he whispered, nudging Vince. Vince smirked. "Time to introduce ourselves." Suddenly, a loud knock echoed through the house, startling Emma. John's eyes narrowed as he stood, motioning for Emma to stay behind him. Gripping the rifle, he approached the door cautiously. Peering through the peephole, he saw Vince standing on the porch, his hands raised in mock surrender. "Evening, sir," Vince drawled, his tone dripping with false politeness. "Sorry to bother you so late, but me and my buddies got a little turned around. Any chance we could trouble you for some water?" John didn't budge. "There's a well out back, help yourselves." Vince's grin faltered for a moment before he recovered. "That's mighty kind of you, but we were hoping for a bit more hospitality, maybe a place to rest our heads for the night." "Not interested," John replied, his voice cold. "You've got what you need. Now move along." Behind Vince, the other bandits began to fidget, their patience wearing thin. Jake stepped forward, his cocky demeanor on full display. "Oh, come on, old man, don't be like that. We're just looking for a little fun." John's grip on the rifle tightened. "You've got 5 seconds to leave my property." Vince's smile turned into a sneer. "You're making a big mistake, pal." Before anyone could react, the sound of a shotgun being cocked echoed through the room. Emma stood at the doorway to the kitchen, her eyes blazing with determination as she pointed the weapon at the group. "I suggest you listen to him," she said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. The bandits hesitated, their bravado momentarily shaken by the unexpected defiance. Vince raised his hands, signaling his men to step back. "We'll leave," he said, his tone laced with mockery. "For now." As the group retreated into the night, John turned to Emma, his expression a mix of pride and concern. "That was brave, but dangerous," he said. "They would have hurt us if I didn't," Emma replied, her hands trembling as she lowered the shotgun. John placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll be ready if they come back. But something tells me this isn't over." The Carver household was anything but quiet that night. Though the bandits had retreated, John knew it wasn't the end of their trouble. He stood by the window, his rifle leaning against the wall, watching the tree line for any sign of movement. Emma sat in the living room, trying to steady her nerves. She had faced danger head-on, but the thought of what might happen next sent a chill down her spine. "Dad," she called softly, breaking the tense silence. "What if they come back with more men?" John turned toward her, his expression serious but calm. "They probably will," he admitted. "Men like them don't take kindly to being turned away, but this is our home and we're not going to let them take it from us." Emma nodded, drawing strength from her father's resolve. Despite his stoic demeanor, she could see the wheels turning in his mind, already strategizing for what was to come. Meanwhile, back at the abandoned barn, the bandits were nursing their bruised egos. Vince paced angrily, his fists clenched. "That old man thinks he's tough," he growled. "We'll see how tough he is when we turn that farm into ashes." "Are you sure it's worth it?" Jake asked hesitantly. "He's got guns, and the girl, she's no pushover either." Vince rounded on him, his eyes blazing. "Don't tell me you're scared of some farmer and his daughter. We're not walking away from this." The other gang members exchanged uneasy glances, but nodded in agreement. Vince was their leader, and defiance wasn't an option. As the hours stretched into early morning, John worked tirelessly to prepare for the worst. He reinforced the windows, set up a makeshift alarm system with empty cans and string around the perimeter, and ensured that all their weapons were loaded and within reach. Emma helped where she could, her determination growing with every step. "Why didn't you tell me more about your time in the Navy?" Emma asked as they worked. "I feel like I don't know that side of you." John paused, the weight of her question hanging in the air. "Because I wanted you to have a life that wasn't shadowed by the things I've done," he said finally. "But some lessons stick with you, and they'll come in handy now." As dawn broke, casting a pale light over the farm, the bandits began their approach. They came in 2 groups, splitting to surround the property. Vince led one group toward the front door while Jake and a couple of others crept around the back. They moved slowly, trying to stay hidden as they closed in. The sound of cans rattling suddenly broke the stillness, sending the bandits scrambling for cover. John's makeshift alarm system had worked. He motioned for Emma to take her position behind the couch, her shotgun at the ready. "Stay low and don't fire unless you have to," he whispered. Vince, realizing their element of surprise was gone, decided to switch tactics. He stepped into the open, his hands raised mockingly. "Come on, old man," he shouted. "You can't hide in there forever. We just want to talk." John stepped onto the porch, his rifle trained on Vince. "This is private property," he said firmly. "You're trespassing. You've got guts. I'll give you that," Vince sneered. "But guts won't save you. Let's make a deal. You let us in, we take what we want, and nobody gets hurt. John's finger tightened slightly on the trigger. That's not happening. You've got 10 seconds to leave. Vince smirked, signaling to his men. Then I guess we'll take it by force. At his signal, the bandits rushed forward, but their attack was met with calculated resistance. John fired a warning shot into the air, stopping them in their tracks. From her position inside, Emma aimed her shotgun at the back door, ready for anyone who might try to sneak in. Jake, emboldened by the chaos, broke away from the group and darted toward the side of the house. He reached the window and began to pry it open, but as he climbed inside, he found himself face to face with Emma, her shotgun aimed squarely at his chest. "Don't move," she commanded, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her. Jake froze, his hands raised. "Hey, take it easy," he stammered. "I'm not here to hurt you." "Then why are you breaking into my house?" she shot back. Outside, John was holding his ground. Despite being outnumbered, his precise aim and calm demeanor kept the bandits at bay. Vince, however, wasn't ready to give up. He barked orders to his crew, urging them to press on. But the carvers weren't fighting alone. Unknown to the bandits, some of the townsfolk, alerted by the commotion, had started to gather. Armed with rifles and shotguns of their own, they began to close in on the barn, cutting off the bandits' escape route. The sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows over the Carver farm as tensions reached a boiling point. From his position on the porch, John noticed movement near the tree line. A small group of townsfolk emerged, cautiously advancing with weapons in hand. Among them was Sam Whitaker, the town's blacksmith, and an old friend of John's. "John," Sam called out, keeping low as he approached. "We saw the commotion and figured you could use a hand." Relief washed over John's face, though he kept his focus on the bandits still lurking near the barn. "Glad you're here," he said, his voice steady. "These men don't scare easy." Sam nodded, gesturing for the others to spread out. The small group of townsfolk, now a united front, began to flank the barn. The odds were slowly shifting in the carvers' favor, but the situation remained precarious. Inside the house, Emma was still holding Jake at gunpoint. Her hands trembled slightly, but her resolve didn't waver. "Sit down," she ordered, motioning to the kitchen chair. Jake complied, his eyes darting nervously around the room as he tried to calculate his next move. "You don't have to do this," Jake said, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "We were just passing through. Vince, he's the one who wanted trouble." Emma scoffed, her grip tightening on the shotgun. "And you followed him here. That makes you just as guilty." Outside, Vince was beginning to lose patience. The sight of the armed townsfolk closing in on his crew only fueled his frustration. He knew they were outnumbered, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. "We're not leaving without a fight," he roared, rallying his men. John, ever the strategist, seized the opportunity to negotiate. He stepped forward, his rifle still trained on Vince. "You're surrounded," he said firmly. "Call off your men, and I'll let you walk away. Keep this up and you won't make it out of here." Vince sneered, refusing to show weakness. "You think you've won just because you've got a few farmers with pitchforks? We're not afraid of you." Before John could respond, a gunshot rang out from the barn. One of the bandits, panicked by the advancing townsfolk, had fired a warning shot into the air. The sound echoed across the farm, and for a moment, everything was still. Then chaos erupted. The bandits, realizing they were cornered, launched a desperate attack. Vince and his men fired wildly, aiming to intimidate rather than hit their targets. The townsfolk, however, stood their ground, their resolve hardened by the threat to their community. John shouted orders, directing the townsfolk to take cover and return fire only if necessary. His calm demeanor under pressure was a testament to his training, and it inspired confidence in those around him. Inside the house, Emma heard the commotion and knew she had to act quickly. Keeping her shotgun trained on Jake, she ordered him to stand. "We're going outside," she said. "And if you try anything, I won't hesitate." Jake hesitated but complied, realizing he had little choice. Emma led him out the back door, keeping him in front of her as a shield. When they emerged, the sight of Vince and the other bandits under fire from the townsfolk made Jake's heart race. "Vince!" Jake shouted. "They've got me!" Vince turned, his expression darkening as he saw Emma holding Jake at gunpoint. For the first time, uncertainty flickered in his eyes. He knew his crew was outmatched, but surrendering wasn't in his nature. John seized the moment, stepping forward with his rifle aimed squarely at Vince. "It's over," he said. "Tell your men to drop their weapons." Vince hesitated, his pride warring with the reality of the situation. His crew was outnumbered, outgunned, and demoralized. Slowly, he raised his hands in surrender. "Stand down!" he barked to his men. One by one, the bandits lowered their weapons, the fight draining out of them. The townsfolk moved in quickly, securing the gang and collecting their firearms. The air was thick with tension, but the worst was over. As the dust settled, John turned to Emma, his eyes filled with both pride and concern. "You okay?" he asked. Emma nodded, lowering the shotgun. "Yeah, I'm okay." Sam approached, clapping John on the shoulder. "You handled that like a pro," he said. "We couldn't have done it without you." John shook his head. "It wasn't just me, it was all of us." Vince and his crew were rounded up and taken into custody, their reign of terror brought to an end. The townsfolk lingered, exchanging stories of bravery and relief as the sun began to set. For the first time in days, the Carver farm was quiet again. The tension at the Carver farm eased as the townsfolk worked together to secure the bandits. Bound with thick rope and seated on the dusty ground near the barn, Vince and his gang looked less like the fearsome outlaws they pretended to be, and more like a pack of cornered wolves. Their arrogance was replaced by bitter silence, though Vince occasionally shot defiant glares toward John and the others. Sam and a few other men took charge of guarding the captured gang, while John stood by Emma's side, his arm around her shoulders. She leaned into him, exhaustion finally catching up with her after the long, harrowing ordeal. "You did good," John said softly. "You kept your head, stayed strong. I'm proud of you." Emma offered a tired smile. "I couldn't have done it without you, Dad. You taught me everything I know." As the remaining townsfolk gathered near the barn, discussions began about what to do next. Sheriff Bill Greer, a no-nonsense man with a weathered face and a deep voice, arrived on the scene, his patrol car kicking up a trail of dust. He stepped out, adjusting his hat as he took in the sight of the subdued bandits and the armed townsfolk. "Looks like I missed all the action," Sheriff Greer remarked, his tone dry but tinged with approval. "How you folks handled this better than most." John approached him, extending a hand. "Sheriff, glad you're here." Greer shook his hand firmly. "From the looks of things, you've got this under control. But I'll make sure these troublemakers get what's coming to them." The sheriff's deputies began loading the bandits into the back of patrol cars, starting with Vince. As they hauled him to his feet, he turned to John, his eyes narrowing with hatred. "You got lucky today," Vince spat. "But don't think this is over. People like me don't stay locked up forever." John's expression didn't waver. He stepped closer, his voice low and steady. "People like you always think they're invincible, but you're not. If you ever come back here, you'll regret it." Vince opened his mouth to retort, but the sheriff cut him off with a firm shove toward the patrol car. "That's enough out of you," Greer said. "You'll have plenty of time to talk in a jail cell." As the last of the bandits were driven away, the townsfolk erupted into quiet cheers and relieved smiles. They shook hands with John, thanking him for his leadership and courage. Sam clapped him on the back, a wide grin on his face. "Guess the Navy SEAL instincts never really fade, huh?" Sam joked. John chuckled. "I suppose not." As the crowd began to disperse, Emma and John returned to the house, the adrenaline of the day slowly giving way to exhaustion. Inside, the kitchen still bore the marks of the morning's chaos. A chair tipped over, a scattering of tools from John's hurried preparations. Emma set about tidying up, her movements slow but purposeful. "Are you okay?" John asked, watching her carefully. Emma paused, her hands resting on the table. "I think so, it's just a lot to process." John nodded, pulling out a chair and motioning for her to sit. "Take your time. We've been through a lot today." She sat down, her gaze fixed on her hands. "I was so scared, Dad, but at the same time, I felt like I couldn't let them win. I had to do something." John reached across the table, placing a hand on hers. "That's what courage is, Emma. It's not about not being scared. It's about standing up and doing what's right, even when you are." His words seemed to comfort her, and for a moment, the house was quiet, save for the faint chirping of crickets outside. The peace was a welcome change from the chaos of the morning. Later that evening, as the sun set over the fields, John and Emma sat on the porch, watching the golden light fade into twilight. The events of the day felt like a distant memory, though the lessons it had taught them lingered. "Do you think they'll come back?" Emma asked, breaking the silence. John shook his head. "Not Vince and his crew. The sheriff will see to that. but there will always be people like them. That's why we have to stay strong. Stay prepared." Emma nodded, her expression resolute. "We will." As the stars began to dot the sky, a soft breeze rustled the leaves of the nearby trees. For the first time in what felt like ages, the carvers allowed themselves to relax, knowing they had faced danger and come out stronger for it. The calm of the evening settled over the carver farm, but John's mind remained alert. Even with Vince and his crew hauled off by the sheriff, his instincts told him the ordeal wasn't entirely over. He had spent years learning to anticipate the unexpected, and today had reminded him that vigilance was never optional. As the last light of day faded, Emma stepped out onto the porch carrying 2 steaming mugs of tea. She handed one to John and sat beside him, her gaze drifting over the fields that stretched toward the horizon. The quiet of the night was soothing, but Emma couldn't shake the images of the day, the bandits, faces, the fear, and the adrenaline that had surged through her. "Do you think we'll ever feel normal again?" she asked softly, breaking the silence. John sipped his tea before answering. "Normal is relative, Emma. We'll adapt, just like we always do. Life throws challenges at us, but it's how we handle them that matters." Emma nodded, taking comfort in his words. Her father had always been a source of wisdom and strength, and today had shown her just how deeply those traits ran. The next morning dawned bright and clear, the events of the previous day still fresh in everyone's minds. John wasted no time getting to work. He began repairing the damage to the farm, reinforcing the windows, and checking the perimeter for any signs that the bandits might have left behind. Emma joined him, her determination matching his as they worked side by side. Their efforts didn't go unnoticed. As word spread through Elmswood about the carver's bravery, neighbors began to show up, offering help and supplies. It was a testament to the tight-knit community that had formed over generations of shared hardship and mutual support. By midday, a small group had gathered at the farm. Sam brought his tools to help with repairs, while Mary Evans, the town baker, arrived with baskets of fresh bread and pies. Even Sheriff Greer made an appearance, taking a moment to check on the carvers and update them on the situation. "Vince and his gang are in holding," the sheriff said, as he leaned against the porch railing. "They won't be bothering anyone for a long time, but I'd recommend keeping your guard up just in case." "We always do," John replied, his voice steady. "Thanks for everything, Sheriff." Greer tipped his hat. "You're the one who deserves the thanks. You stood up for your family and the whole town. Not everyone could have done what you did." As the sheriff left, the atmosphere on the farm grew lighter. With the help of their neighbors, the carvers made quick work of the repairs. By evening, the farm was not only restored but fortified, a testament to the resilience of its owners and the community that rallied around them. That night, as the neighbors gathered on the porch for a shared meal, laughter filled the air. Stories were exchanged, and the tension that had gripped everyone began to fade. For the first time since the bandits' arrival, Emma allowed herself to truly relax. She smiled as she listened to Sam recount a humorous tale from his blacksmithing days, the weight of the past days lifting from her shoulders. After the meal, as the last of the neighbors departed, John and Emma stood at the edge of the porch, watching the lanterns of their friends bob down the road. The farm was quiet once more, but this time it felt like a sanctuary again. "You know," Emma said, her voice thoughtful, "it's strange. What happened was terrifying, but it also showed me how much strength we have. Not just us, but the whole town." John smiled, his arm resting on her shoulder. "Adversity has a way of bringing out the best in people. We don't face these things alone, Emma. That's what makes us stronger." As the stars began to dot the night sky, John and Emma sat in comfortable silence, each lost in their thoughts. The farm had endured, and so had they. The challenges they had faced had only strengthened their bond, reminding them of the power of family, community, and resilience. The following days brought a newfound sense of unity to Elmswood. The town, which had always been close-knit, now felt like a fortress of mutual trust and support. News of the carvers' bravery and the community's swift response had spread beyond Elmswood, even catching the attention of neighboring towns. It wasn't every day that a small farming town stood up against a band of outlaws and emerged victorious. For John, life settled back into its familiar rhythm, though the events had left a lasting impression. He continued his routine of working the land, fixing equipment, and keeping the farm running smoothly. But now, he was more vigilant, always watching for signs of anything unusual. The military instincts that he had long tried to suppress were fully reawakened. Emma, too, had grown from the experience. The fear she once carried had transformed into a quiet confidence. She threw herself into her work with a renewed sense of purpose, determined to show herself and the world that she was more than capable of handling life's challenges. Her encounters with the bandits had revealed a strength she hadn't known she possessed. One afternoon, as Emma was tending to the horses in the barn, she noticed an unfamiliar vehicle approaching down the dusty road leading to their farm. Her heart quickened as she wiped her hands on her jeans and stepped out to get a better look. The pickup truck came to a slow stop near the house, and a man stepped out. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a weathered face that suggested years of hard labor. His clothes were simple, but there was a sharpness in his eyes that hinted at intelligence and determination. "Afternoon," the man said, tipping his hat. "Name's Hank Grayson. I own the ranch just over the county line." John stepped out onto the porch, his rifle slung casually over his shoulder. Though his posture was relaxed, his eyes were wary. "What can I do for you, Hank?" Hank raised his hands slightly, a gesture of peace. "Heard about what happened here. Just wanted to say I admire what you did, standing up to those bandits and protecting your family. Not everyone has the guts for that." John nodded, his expression unreadable. "We did what we had to. This is our home." "I get that," Hank said. "And I'm not here to intrude. But if you ever need anything, help with repairs, extra hands for the harvest, whatever, don't hesitate to call. Folks like us have to stick together." Emma, who had been watching from a distance, stepped closer, curious about the newcomer. "Thanks, Mr. Grayson," she said. "We appreciate the offer." Hank smiled, tipping his hat again. "The offer's always open. Take care of yourselves now." As Hank drove off, Emma turned to her father. "Do you think he's sincere?" she asked. John shrugged. "Hard to say, but it doesn't hurt to have more allies." The rest of the day passed uneventfully, but Hank's visit left Emma thinking. She realized how much the events had changed her perspective, not just about danger, but about the importance of connections and trust. In times of crisis, those bonds could mean the difference between survival and defeat. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Emma sat on the porch with a notebook in her lap. She had begun jotting down thoughts and ideas about the farm, ways to improve security, plans for future crops, and even a few notes on self-defense techniques her father had started teaching her. John joined her, carrying 2 glasses of iced tea. "So you've been busy," he remarked, glancing at her notebook. Emma smiled, setting it aside. "Just trying to be prepared. I don't want to be caught off guard again." John nodded approvingly. "Good. It's always better to be ready for the unexpected." For a moment, they sat in comfortable silence, the sound of crickets filling the air. Then Emma spoke, her voice thoughtful. "Dad, do you ever regret leaving the Navy? All the skills you learned there, they've been so useful. Don't you miss it?" John looked out at the fields, his expression contemplative. "I don't regret it," he said finally. "I've seen enough of war and violence to last a lifetime, but I'm grateful for what it taught me. Discipline, resilience, how to protect the people I care about. Those lessons are part of who I am, and they always will be." Emma nodded, understanding her father's words on a deeper level than she had before. The experiences they had faced together had brought them closer, forging a bond that was unshakable. As the stars began to fill the night sky, Emma leaned her head on her father's shoulder. "No matter what happens," she said softly, "we'll face it together." John placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice steady. "Always." The days passed, and while life on the Carver farm returned to its usual rhythm, a lingering sense of unease remained. Though the bandits had been arrested, John's instincts told him not to let his guard down. His time as a Navy SEAL had taught him that trouble often came when least expected, and he was determined to stay prepared. Emma, on the other hand, had thrown herself into her responsibilities with renewed vigor. She had always loved the farm, but now it felt like more than just their livelihood. It was a symbol of their resilience. She spent her mornings tending to the crops and her afternoons in the barn, brushing the horses and talking to them as if they were old friends. One crisp morning, as Emma was feeding the chickens, she noticed a figure approaching the farm from the main road. Her heart skipped a beat as she set down the feed bucket and squinted toward the figure. It wasn't a bandit, but rather Sheriff Greer. He was walking purposefully, his hat tilted low against the sun. "Sheriff," Emma greeted, wiping her hands on her jeans as he reached the yard. "Is everything okay?" Greer nodded, though his expression was serious. "Morning, Emma." Is your father around? I need to speak with him. Emma pointed toward the barn. He's fixing the tractor. I'll get him. A few moments later, John emerged, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. His sharp eyes scanned the sheriff's face, immediately sensing the gravity of the visit. What's going on, Sheriff? Greer hesitated before speaking. I came to give you a heads up. Vince and his crew are being transferred to a larger facility tomorrow, but word is, some of his associates might still be lurking in the area. I don't want to alarm you, but I thought you should know. John's jaw tightened, his mind already working through the implications. Thanks for the warning. We'll be ready. Greer nodded. I'll have deputies patrolling the area, but if you see anything suspicious, call us right away. After the sheriff left, John turned to Emma. Looks like we'll need to step things up around here. Emma's brow furrowed. You think they'll come back, even after what happened? It's possible, John said. People like Vince don't take kindly to being humiliated, and if he's got friends still out there, they might try something. That afternoon, John and Emma got to work reinforcing their defenses. They doubled down on securing the house, adding extra locks to the doors and setting up motion-activated lights around the property. John even retrieved an old trunk from the attic, filled with gear from his Navy days. Sturdy ropes, camouflage netting, and other tools that might come in handy. Emma watched as her father meticulously planned their next steps. She couldn't help but marvel at his calm demeanor and the precision with which he worked. You're amazing, she said, handing him a set of tools. You always know exactly what to do. John gave her a small smile. Experience. And a lot of mistakes along the way. As night fell, the farm was bathed in an eerie quiet. The lights they had installed cast long shadows across the yard, and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind made Emma's heart race. She tried to shake off her nervousness, reminding herself that they had done everything they could to prepare. John stayed awake, sitting by the window with his rifle resting across his lap. His sharp eyes scanned the darkness, searching for any sign of movement. He wasn't a man prone to paranoia, but he trusted his instincts, and they told him to remain vigilant. Around midnight, a faint sound broke the silence, a soft crunching of gravel near the edge of the property. John's muscles tensed as he leaned forward, his grip tightening on the rifle. He gestured for Emma, who was dozing on the couch, to stay quiet. The sound grew closer, and John's sharp eyes caught the faint glimmer of a flashlight moving through the trees. His heart quickened, but his mind remained calm. He signaled for Emma to move to the back of the house, where they had set up a safe room just in case. Emma hesitated but nodded, slipping away silently. John positioned himself by the window, his finger hovering near the trigger as he watched the flashlight's beams sweep across the yard. The intruder stepped into view, a man dressed in dark clothing, his face partially obscured by a hood. He carried a crowbar in one hand and moved cautiously, scanning his surroundings. John didn't recognize him, but it was clear the man wasn't here for anything good. Before the intruder could make it to the house, John shouted, his voice cutting through the night. "Stop right there! You're on private property!" The man froze, his flashlight dropping to the ground as he raised his hands. "Don't shoot!" he called, his voice shaky. John kept the rifle trained on him as he stepped outside, his movements deliberate. "Who are you and what are you doing here?" I was just looking for food," the man stammered, though his crowbar suggested otherwise. "Drop the crowbar and back away slowly," John commanded. The man complied, his hands trembling. By the time Sheriff Greer arrived, summoned by Emma's quick call, the situation was under control. The man was taken into custody, and John's suspicions were confirmed. Vince's associates were indeed still out there. The incident with the intruder only strengthened John's resolve to remain vigilant. It was a stark reminder that Vince's influence wasn't confined to a jail cell. If one of his associates had been bold enough to approach the farm, there could be others lurking nearby, waiting for an opportunity. The following morning, John called a meeting with Emma in the kitchen. The warm smell of coffee filled the room, but the atmosphere was anything but relaxed. A map of the property lay spread out on the table, marked with circles and lines where John had planned their defenses. "We need to reassess everything," John began, pointing to the map. "Last night was a warning. If there's more of them out there, they won't stop with just one attempt." Emma nodded, her expression serious. "What do you want to do?" John tapped a section of the map near the barn. "First, we're going to fortify this area. It's the easiest spot to approach from the road. Then we'll set up some additional traps along the perimeter. Nothing lethal, just enough to slow anyone down and give us a warning." Emma studied the map, her mind already racing with ideas. What about the animals? If they hear or smell something unusual, they'll react. We can use that to our advantage. John smiled faintly, proud of her quick thinking. Good idea. We'll move the horses closer to the house for the time being. They'll alert us if anything's off. As they worked through their plans, the community once again rallied around them. Sam showed up with a wagon full of lumber and tools, ready to assist with the fortifications. Mary brought over fresh supplies, and several other neighbors pitched in, helping to turn the farm into a near impenetrable stronghold. By the end of the day, the Carver farm was transformed. Reinforced fences lined the property. Motion sensor lights covered every angle, and the barn doors had been reinforced with heavy beams. John even constructed a few hidden tripwire alarms around the edges of the property, a trick he had picked up during his military days. Emma felt a renewed sense of security as she looked at the fortified farm. "It's like a fortress now," she said, wiping sweat from her brow as she stood beside her father. John nodded, surveying their work. "It's a start, but we stay prepared. Complacency is what they're counting on." The peace that followed was fragile but welcome. Days passed without incident, and life began to feel almost normal again. Emma threw herself back into her work, tending to the crops and caring for the animals. She had taken to carrying a small knife on her belt, a practical tool, but also a symbol of her newfound determination. One quiet afternoon, as Emma was collecting eggs from the chicken coop, she noticed a figure standing at the edge of the property. Her heart skipped a beat, and she instinctively reached for the knife at her side. But as the figure stepped closer, she realized it was Hank Grayson, the rancher who had visited before. Emma walked out to meet him, her guard still up. "Mr. Grayson," she said, her voice steady. "What brings you here?" Hank removed his hat, a gesture of respect. "Heard about the trouble you had the other night. Just wanted to check in and see if you needed anything." Emma relaxed slightly, but kept her tone polite. "Thanks for the concern, but we've got things under control." Hank nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Good to hear. If you ever need an extra pair of hands, don't hesitate to ask. Folks like Vince and his crew thrive on fear. The best way to beat them is to stick together." Emma studied him for a moment before nodding. "We'll keep that in mind." Hank tipped his hat again and left, leaving Emma with a lingering sense of unease. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, but something about him didn't sit right. When she mentioned the visit to her father later, John's reaction was cautious. "Hank seems friendly enough," John said, "but we don't know much about him. Keep your guard up. Trust is earned, not given." That evening, as Emma lay in bed, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was brewing. The quiet of the farm felt heavy, like the calm before a storm. She thought about the intruder, Hank's visit, and the possibility that Vince's associates were still watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. The night stretched on, and sleep eluded her. Emma finally got up and wandered to the living room, where her father sat in his usual spot by the window. His rifle rested across his lap, and his eyes were fixed on the darkness outside. "Couldn't sleep?" John asked without looking away from the window. Emma shook her head, sinking into the chair across from him. "I can't stop thinking about everything. It's like they're still out there, watching." "They might be," John admitted, "but if they come, we'll be ready." His words were simple, but they carried a weight that comforted Emma. She leaned back in her chair, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. Whatever was coming, she knew they would face it together. The stillness of the following days was both a relief and a source of unease for Emma and John. The lack of activity around the farm should have brought them peace, but it only heightened their vigilance. Both knew that silence could be as dangerous as the roar of conflict. It often meant that something was lurking just out of sight. John spent his mornings patrolling the property. Armed with his rifle and a pair of binoculars, he walked the perimeter of the farm, checking the traps and alarms they had set up. Each day, he found nothing unusual, but his instincts told him not to relax. Emma, meanwhile, busied herself with the chores. The animals needed care, the crops demanded attention, and the endless cycle of farm work provided a welcome distraction from the lingering tension. Yet, every time she ventured near the edges of the property, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. One afternoon, as she was weeding the vegetable garden, a rustling sound in the nearby trees made her pause. She straightened up, wiping sweat from her forehead, and peered toward the woods. The sound came again, a faint, almost imperceptible movement. "Dad?" she called out, her voice steady but cautious. John appeared from around the side of the barn, his rifle slung over his shoulder. "What is it?" he asked, his tone instantly alert. "I heard something," Emma said, pointing toward the tree line. "Over there." John's expression hardened. He moved quickly to her side, his eyes scanning the area. For a long moment, there was nothing but the sound of the breeze rustling the leaves. Then, a flicker of movement caught his eye, a shadow darting between the trees. Inside. "Now," John ordered, his voice low but commanding. Emma didn't argue. She hurried to the house, her heart pounding, while John kept his rifle trained on the tree line. He didn't fire, but his presence was a clear warning to whoever, or whatever, was out there. Once inside, Emma watched anxiously as her father locked the doors and closed the curtains. "Do you think it's them?" she asked. "Could be," John said, "or it could be someone else. Either way, we're not taking chances." The rest of the day passed in tense silence. John stayed near the windows, his rifle never far from reach, while Emma kept busy preparing supplies, just in case they had to defend the farm again. The weight of the unknown hung heavy in the air. As night fell, the farm seemed to come alive with every creak and whisper of the wind. The motion-activated lights flickered on and off, triggered by the occasional stray animal, but each flash made Emma's heart race. Around midnight, the sound of a vehicle approaching shattered the quiet. Emma bolted upright from the couch, her eyes wide as she turned to her father. John was already on his feet, his rifle in hand. "Stay low," he instructed, moving toward the window. Emma crouched behind the couch, clutching the knife she kept at her side. Her breathing was shallow as she listened to the crunch of tires on gravel. The vehicle stopped just outside the fence, its engine idling for a moment before shutting off. John peered through the curtain, his jaw tightening as he recognized the silhouette of the truck. It was the same vehicle Hank Grayson had driven during his visit to the farm. But why was he back in the middle of the night? "Hank!" John called out, his voice firm. "What are you doing here?" There was no immediate response. The truck's door opened and Hank stepped out, his hands visible in the dim glow of the porch light. "Evening, John," he said, his voice calm. "Didn't mean to startle you." "You've got a strange way of visiting," John replied, keeping his rifle ready but not aimed. "What do you want?" Hank took a few cautious steps forward, stopping just outside the gate. "I heard something about Vince's crew. Word is some of his men are planning to make a move. I figured you'd want to know." John's grip on the rifle tightened. "Why are you involved, Hank? What do you know about this?" Hank hesitated, his gaze flickering to the ground. "I used to run with them, years ago, before I got my ranch. I left that life behind, but some ties don't break as easily as you'd like." Emma, still crouched behind the couch, listened intently. Her instincts told her there was more to Hank's story than he was letting on. "Why should I trust you?" John asked, his voice sharp. Hank raised his hands, a gesture of surrender. "You don't have to. I just thought you'd appreciate the warning. They'll come at night, probably in the next few days. Be ready." With that, he turned and walked back to his truck, leaving John and Emma to process his cryptic message. "Do you believe him?" Emma asked once Hank was gone. John's expression was grim. "I don't know, but we can't ignore the possibility. If he's right, we're in for another fight." Hank's visit lingered in John's mind as the days passed. His warning, cryptic as it was, couldn't be dismissed. John had learned during his Navy days that the best way to prepare for an attack was to assume the worst. If Vince's crew, or what remained of them, were planning to strike, John wanted to be ready. He and Emma spent the next few days doubling their efforts. Every corner of the property was fortified, every potential weak spot addressed. The animals were moved closer to the house, their paddocks positioned within the perimeter of their defensive setup. John even trained Emma on the finer points of handling her shotgun, running drills to ensure she could react quickly under pressure. "Breathe, Emma," John instructed one afternoon, as she aimed at a makeshift target they had set up in the barn. "Slow and steady. Let the shot come naturally." Emma exhaled, her finger pressing the trigger. The shot rang out, hitting the center of the target. She lowered the shotgun, her face lighting up with a mixture of pride and relief. "Not bad," John said with a faint smile. "But remember, out there, it's not just about accuracy. It's about staying calm, keeping your head clear." Emma nodded, absorbing his words. "I'll be ready, Dad, I promise." By the time the sun dipped below the horizon that evening, the farm felt like a fortress. But even with all their preparations, the tension in the air was palpable. Every creak of wood, every rustle of leaves set Emma on edge. John, ever the sentinel, kept his post by the living room window, his rifle resting across his lap. As the clock struck midnight, a faint noise broke the quiet, a low rumble, distant but unmistakable. Emma froze, her heart pounding as she turned to her father. "Engines," John said grimly, rising from his chair. He motioned for Emma to follow him to the safe room they had prepared. "Stay in here and don't come out until I say so." "No," Emma said, her voice firm despite the fear in her eyes. "I'm not hiding, Dad. We're in this together." John hesitated but saw the resolve in her face. He handed her the shotgun. "All right, but you stay behind me, and you do exactly as I say." They moved to the front of the house, their steps silent on the wooden floor. Peering through the curtains, John saw several vehicles pulling up along the edge of the property. Their headlights were off, but the silhouettes of men climbing out were clear in the moonlight. "Looks like Hank was telling the truth," John muttered. "They're here." The motion sensor lights around the property flickered on, illuminating the intruders. The men hesitated for a moment, clearly surprised by the brightness, but they quickly regrouped. One of them, a burly man with a bandana covering his face, stepped forward, shouting toward the house. "We don't want no trouble, old man," he called out, his voice carrying across the yard. "But Vince said to deliver a message. You made a mistake messing with us." John stepped onto the porch, his rifle at the ready. His presence alone was enough to give the intruders pause, but their leader didn't back down. "The mistake was yours," John said, his voice calm but laced with authority. "You had your warning. Leave now, and this doesn't have to get ugly." The leader laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "Oh, it's already ugly. Boys, let's show him what happens when you cross us." At his signal, the men began to advance, their weapons drawn, but they hadn't accounted for John's preparations. As they moved closer, a series of tripwire alarms went off, the sound of clattering cans and piercing whistles disrupting their approach. The men faltered, and John took the opportunity to fire a warning shot into the air. "That's your final warning," he shouted. "Come any closer and you'll regret it." But the leader wasn't deterred. "Take him out," he yelled. Chaos erupted. John's precise shots kept the intruders at bay, while Emma, positioned at the back door, held her ground, ready to protect their flank. The motion sensor lights and alarms worked to their advantage, disorienting the attackers and making it difficult for them to coordinate. In the midst of the chaos, Emma spotted movement near the barn. One of the intruders was attempting to flank the house, creeping along the shadows. She took a deep breath, raised her shotgun and shouted, "Stop right there!" The man froze, his hands raised as he saw her aiming directly at him. "Don't shoot," he stammered. "Drop your weapon and get on the ground," Emma commanded. The man complied, and Emma kept her eyes on him as she called out to her father, "Dad, I've got one over here." John, hearing her voice, moved quickly to her side. Together, they secured the intruder, tying him up with one of the ropes John had prepared. The other attackers, realizing they were outmatched, began to retreat, their leader shouting for a retreat as John's sharp aim kept them pinned down. Within minutes, the yard was quiet again. The attackers had fled, leaving behind their captured ally. John and Emma stood together, their breathing heavy but their resolve unshaken. "We did it," Emma said softly, her voice filled with both disbelief and pride. John nodded, placing a hand on her shoulder. "We did. But this isn't over yet. We'll make sure it is." The quiet after the confrontation felt like the calm before another storm. The intruders had fled, but John knew better than to assume they wouldn't return. The man Emma had captured was bound securely and seated in the barn, his face pale with fear under the dim light of a hanging lantern. His weapon, a rusty pistol, lay on a nearby table, far out of his reach. John stood in front of the man, arms crossed, his presence as intimidating as his silence. Emma, standing beside him, held her shotgun loosely but confidently, her eyes never leaving the captive. "You've got one chance to talk," John said, his voice low and steady. "Who are you and why are you here?" The man hesitated, his eyes darting between John and Emma. "I'm nobody, man," he stammered. "I was just following orders." "Whose orders?" John pressed, taking a step closer. His calm demeanor made the tension in the room all the more suffocating. "Vince's," the man blurted. "He sent us. Said we had to teach you a lesson, but he's locked up, I swear. We're just doing what he told us before he got arrested." John exchanged a glance with Emma before leaning in. "And why send you out here now? What's the plan?" The man swallowed hard, sweat beading on his forehead. They were hoping to scare you off." Maybe burn down the farm, rough you up. Vince doesn't like being embarrassed. Burn down the farm, Emma repeated, her grip on the shotgun tightening. John raised a hand to calm her. Where are the others now? He asked, his tone growing sharper. They'll regroup, the man admitted reluctantly. But they won't come back tonight. Not after what you just pulled. John straightened, his jaw tightening as he processed the information. Why should I believe you? The man shook his head frantically. I'm telling the truth, I swear. Look, I don't want any trouble. I'm done with this. Let me go and you'll never see me again. Emma shot John a skeptical look, but he ignored it, his mind working quickly. We'll see about that, he muttered. He turned to Emma. Keep an eye on him. I need to make a call. Emma nodded, her gaze locked on the captive as John left the barn. She didn't say a word, but her steady presence was enough to keep the man in line. Outside, John stepped onto the porch, pulling out his phone to call Sheriff Greer. The sheriff answered on the second ring, his voice gruff but attentive. Carver, what's going on? We had visitors, John said bluntly. Vince's crew, or what's left of them. They tried to hit the farm tonight. There was a pause on the other end. Everyone okay? We're fine. They didn't get far, but we've got one of them tied up in the barn and he's talking. Greer's voice hardened. I'll head out there with my deputies. Don't let him out of your sight. Wasn't planning on it, John replied. But hurry. I don't trust him. Hanging up, John turned his gaze to the dark expanse of the farm. The tripwires, the lights, and their quick thinking had held off the attackers tonight, but he knew they couldn't rely on luck forever. Reinforcements, real ones, would be necessary to end this once and for all. Back in the barn, Emma remained vigilant. The captive fidgeted nervously under her watchful eye. You're not like the rest of them, are you? Emma asked suddenly, her tone neutral. The man looked up, surprised. What do you mean? You're scared, Emma said. The others, Vince's crew, they're reckless and arrogant. But you don't seem like you want to be here. The man hesitated, then sighed heavily. I didn't sign up for this kind of trouble. I thought it'd be easy money, you know, small-town job, no real risks. But Vince, he doesn't care about anyone but himself. Emma studied him for a moment, weighing his words. Then why stay? Because leaving isn't easy, he admitted. You cross Vince and you're done. Seems to me you've already crossed him by getting caught, Emma pointed out. Maybe it's time to make a better choice. Before the man could respond, the sound of approaching vehicles reached their ears. Emma glanced toward the barn doors, relief washing over her when she saw the sheriff's patrol cars pulling into the yard. John returned, his rifle at the ready, as Greer and his deputies entered the barn. The sheriff wasted no time. You've got a lot of explaining to do, he told the captive, motioning for his deputies to take him into custody. The man didn't resist, his shoulders slumping as the weight of his decisions finally caught up with him. As the deputies escorted the man out, Greer turned to John and Emma. This isn't over, but you've bought yourself some time. We'll keep a close eye on things from here. John nodded. Appreciate it, Sheriff. Let's make sure they don't get another chance. The morning after the sheriff's visit, the Carver farm was eerily quiet. The events of the previous night had left a palpable tension in the air, but John and Emma refused to let it consume them. While the captured intruder was now in custody, they knew it was only a matter of time before Vince's crew made another attempt, likely with more determination and firepower. John stood on the porch, scanning the property with a practiced eye. The motion-activated lights, reinforced barriers, and makeshift traps had served them well so far, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something more was needed. Inside, Emma was busy securing supplies. She filled jugs with water, packed food into bags, and ensured that all their weapons were loaded and ready. Despite her resolve, the weight of the situation was beginning to wear on her. She paused for a moment, leaning against the kitchen counter as the memories of the past few days flooded her mind. Emma, John called from the doorway, his voice calm but firm. Take a break. I'm fine, Dad, she replied, straightening up. We need to be ready. John stepped into the room, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. We are ready, but we need to keep our heads clear. Sit down for a minute. Reluctantly, Emma sat at the table, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Do you think they'll come back today? John nodded slowly. If they're serious, they'll come soon. They won't want us to have too much time to prepare. As if on cue, the distant hum of engines reached their ears. Emma's heart leapt as she exchanged a glance with her father. John moved quickly to the window, his sharp eyes narrowing as he spotted several vehicles approaching from the main road. They're here, he said, his voice steady. Stay calm. Stick to the plan. Emma grabbed her shotgun, her hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. The two of them moved to their positions, John taking the porch, while Emma guarded the back entrance. The air was thick with tension as the vehicle stopped just outside the property. This time, the intruders came prepared. They stepped out of their trucks with weapons drawn, their faces hardened with determination. At the head of the group was a tall man with a scar running down his cheek, a face John didn't recognize, but one that exuded authority. The man raised his voice, addressing the house. "Carver, you've caused enough trouble. This is your last chance. Come out, or we'll take what we want by force." John stepped onto the porch, his rifle at the ready. "You're trespassing," he called back. "Leave now, and I'll let you walk away. Push your luck, and you won't like how this ends." The leader sneered. "Big talk for a farmer. Let's see if you can back it up." At his signal, the attackers began to advance. The motion sensor lights flickered on, illuminating the yard and disorienting the intruders. John's first shot rang out, striking the ground just inches from their feet. It was a warning, but one that made it clear he wasn't bluffing. Emma held her position at the back of the house, her heart pounding as she listened to the chaos outside. She could hear the men shouting, the sharp cracks of gunfire, and the metallic clatter of traps being triggered. Despite the fear gnawing at her, she stayed focused, her shotgun aimed at the door. Suddenly, she caught movement out of the corner of her eye. One of the intruders was attempting to climb through a side window. Emma acted without hesitation, firing a warning shot that shattered the window frame and sent the man scrambling back. "Not today," she muttered, her grip tightening on the shotgun. Outside, John was a force to be reckoned with. His shots were precise, each one forcing the attackers to retreat further from the house. The traps and barriers they had set up were proving effective, slowing the intruders and throwing their plans into disarray. The leader, frustrated by the unexpected resistance, barked orders to his men. "Flank the house, don't let them hold us off." But John had anticipated this. As the attackers moved to encircle the house, he activated a hidden alarm, a loud piercing siren that echoed across the property. The sound sent the intruders into a panic, their cohesion crumbling as they struggled to regroup. Emma, hearing the alarm, allowed herself a small smile. Her father's meticulous planning was paying off. She stepped outside to join him, her shotgun at the ready. "Looks like they're losing their nerve," she said, glancing at the retreating figures. John nodded, his eyes never leaving the yard. "Let's make sure they don't come back." Together, they pushed forward, driving the attackers further away from the house. By the time the sheriff and his deputies arrived, summoned by the alarm, the remaining intruders were fleeing back to their vehicles. As the dust settled, John and Emma stood side by side, their resolve unbroken. They had faced the odds and emerged victorious once again. But this time, they knew it was more than just a victory. It was a message. This farm wasn't just their home. It was their fortress, and no one would take it from them. The aftermath of the confrontation left the Carver farm quiet once again, though this time, the silence was different. It wasn't the eerie stillness of looming danger, but rather the calm that follows a storm. John and Emma had stood their ground, and the farm had endured. Their hard work, careful planning, and unwavering resolve had protected not only their home but also their way of life. Sheriff Greer and his deputies worked late into the night, securing the captured intruders and gathering evidence from the scene. The leader of the group, scar-faced and defiant, was hauled away in handcuffs, his threats falling on deaf ears. John stood on the porch as the sheriff approached, a mixture of relief and gratitude on his face. "Looks like you've done it again, Carver," Greer said, tipping his hat. "You and your daughter held them off long enough for us to get here. Not many folks could have done that." John shook his head, his expression serious. "It wasn't just us, Sheriff. The community helped us prepare, and that made all the difference." Greer nodded. "Still, you've shown everyone what it means to stand up for what's yours. I'll make sure the men we've caught are locked up for a long time. And if any of Vince's crew come sniffing around again, they'll have the whole town to deal with." As the sheriff's patrol cars drove away, the weight of the night's events began to lift. Emma joined her father on the porch, her shotgun slung over her shoulder. She looked out at the farm, the moonlight casting a soft glow over the fields, and let out a long breath. "Do you think it's over?" she asked, her voice quiet. John glanced at her, his expression softening. "It's never completely over, Emma, but we've shown them that this place isn't an easy target. They'll think twice before coming back." Emma nodded, taking comfort in his words. "I just want things to go back to normal." "They will," John assured her. "And when they do, we'll appreciate it even more." Over the following days, the farm returned to its usual rhythm. The repairs were completed, the animals were back in their usual spots, and the carvers fell into the comforting routine of farm life. The community, inspired by the carvers' courage, rallied even closer together. Neighbors checked in more often, and offers of help and support poured in. Emma found herself reflecting on everything they had been through. The experience had been terrifying, but it had also been transformative. She had discovered a strength within herself that she hadn't known existed. She had stood alongside her father, faced down danger, and emerged stronger for it. One evening, as the sun set over the fields, Emma and John sat on the porch, sipping tea and watching the sky turn shades of orange and pink. The peace of the moment was a stark contrast to the chaos of the days before. "So you know," Emma said, breaking the silence, "I used to think of this farm as just life, the routine, the work. But now, it feels like something more." John raised an eyebrow, waiting for her to continue. "It's ours," Emma said, her voice firm. "We fought for it. We protected it, and that makes it special." John smiled, a rare expression of pride crossing his face. "You're right. This place is more than just a farm. It's a reminder of who we are and what we're capable of." As the stars began to appear in the sky, Emma leaned back in her chair, a sense of calm washing over her. The challenges they had faced had brought her and her father closer, and they had shown her the strength of their bond. No matter what the future held, she knew they could face it together. This story of courage, resilience, and family reminds us all of the power of standing up for what matters most. John and Emma's journey shows that even in the face of overwhelming odds, determination and unity can overcome the darkest challenges. If you found this story inspiring, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe for more incredible tales of bravery, love, and resilience. Hit the notification bell so you never miss another story. And tell us in the comments, what's the bravest thing you've ever done or witnessed? We'd love to hear your stories. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.